For those of you who are visitors, in case you're wondering on the songs, his comments on that, Craig's father is the one who, father-in-law, who compiled the hymnal, and Craig was very much involved in it. So it's one of those things, like in one of my books, I'll notice if a period is out of place or something that none of my readers would ever even notice, and I'm sure it's the same way he probably looks at every note and notices every little thing that may be off. So I thought that was sort of interesting, understanding the background there. Well, I didn't give the brothers a very good title. This is actually not a message about stories. I'm just going to be sharing some stories because I figured after lunch, afternoon, probably all of you would like to be taking a nap. So hopefully sharing some Christian stories will help everybody stay awake. These are some of my favorite Christian stories. They all happen to be by the same author, Leo Tolstoy, who is, he was a Russian author, who's considered one of the greatest authors of all time. And he wrote, the novel War and Peace, and I'm sure other novels. Well, there were other novels he wrote, and but also a lot of short stories that have Christian themes. And I just want to share some of them with you. And yeah, these apply if you're really young. I think I don't have a thing on, do I? Okay. Have you been able to hear anything I've said? Yeah. Okay. Is it all right if I put this on, or you'd rather I not? Doesn't matter at all. Well, I might want to move a little bit, so I'm thinking I should put it on. Is that okay?
Okay, sure.
All right. Can you hear me? Am I on? Okay. I can't tell up here. All right. So the first one is entitled, "How Much Land is Enough?" Okay? All of these take place in Russia in the 1800s, okay? Just so you can kind of picture the scenario in your mind. And this first one is about a peasant named Joseph. He's very poor, like most Russian peasants were, and he worked hard, and it was just frustrating to him. He didn't own the land he worked on. He rented it. He thought, oh, if I could just own my own farm, because I work so hard, and yet a person can never get ahead because you're always paying rent to somebody else, and it's pretty hard when you're poor to ever buy any land, and he just felt like he was stuck in the same situation his whole life. Well, one day one of his neighbors told him that there was a widow woman who had decided to sell 300 acres out of her estate. And he was buying 50. He said, she's letting me put down half, and then the rest of the half I can pay in a year from the income from the farm. So he was getting 50 acres. Well, wow, when Joseph heard that, he went and talked to his wife and said, hey, we maybe have an opportunity to get our own farm. And he told her about the situation, and they put their heads together. They were very thrifty. They had saved up 100 rubles, which wasn't a lot of money, but it was a start. And they had a horse they could sell. And, their oldest son, they figured they could hire him out as a hired laborer and collect the wages in advance. I guess that was something allowed back then. And then they were able to borrow some money from a brother-in-law, and altogether they were able to scrape up enough to pay for half for 40 acres. And then the rest of the half they would pay in a year. So Joseph got his own farm, and that was so sweet. He worked just as hard, but now it was his land. And he would just think how wonderful it was. Just in the evenings he'd go out and look over the land, and it just seemed to be the most beautiful land on the earth. His own wheat, his own dirt, his own little springs, everything was his. And he and his wife were very happy. And it was that way for a number of years. And but then one day, a man was journeying through their village, another peasant, and Joseph invited him to come over and have dinner with them, and they got to talking. And the man said that he lived over near the Volga River, and he said, "You won't believe how cheap the land is over there." And he said, "It is so rich. The rye grows as high as a horse's head there. It's just unbelievable." And anyway, he passed on through the village, and Joseph got to thinking, "Oh boy, if I had land like that, that would be so terrific." And so he talked to his wife, and they decided they would sell everything they had and move out there near the Volga River. And the land was cheaper there. He was able to sell his own farm at a profit. And they were able to buy 300 acres of land there. And so now he had really a nice farm, extremely fertile soil. And on top of that, he was able to rent out or lease another 300 acres. And so he was quite prosperous now. They were able to hire a servant, and you think life was really going well for them. But he got to thinking, this is frustrating that I have to lease. I can't afford to buy any more land. I've got to lease this other acreage, and so every year I've got to pay rent and go through all of those proceedings and negotiate a new lease for the next year. If I had more of my own land, then I'd have no worries, no hassles to go through, but I can't really afford any more here. So he just sat there frustrated. Well, one day a man came through that village. And they got to talking, and he said, I just bought 13,000 acres of land pretty far from here where the Turks live. And he said, I got 13,000 acres. All I had to pay was 1,000 rubles for it. And Joseph said, "Wow, that's incredible." And then he got to thinking, why am I sitting here? 300 acres, I could have thousands of acres by going to the land of the Turks. So anyway, he talked to his wife, and he decided he would head over there and buy the land, and then they could move later, his wife and children. And so he left the next day with his servant. It was 7 days' journey getting there, but he finally reached the land of the Turks. And he had brought some gifts, some tea and things to give the chief. And he told him he had come to buy land. And the chief said, "That's fine." He said, "We've got so much land here. Yeah, we're happy to sell some of it." And Joseph said, "Well, how much is your land?" And the chief said, "It's 1,000 rubles a day." And Joseph said, 1,000 rubles a day? I don't think I understand. And the man said, "Well, we don't have any way to measure land here, so the way we sell it is by the day. That however much land you can walk around in a day, you can have for 1,000 rubles. If you want to walk fast, fine, or slow, whatever you want to do, but it's 1,000 rubles. The only condition is you have to finish your circuit in a day. I mean, you can go in a circle, a square, it doesn't matter, but you got to get back to the starting point by the end of the day. And whatever you walk is yours." So Joseph said, "Okay, that sounds good." So he spent the night there in their wagons, but he didn't sleep. He kept thinking, "Wow, how much can I walk in a day? It's summertime. I'm in pretty good health. I could probably walk 35 miles. That would be thousands and thousands of acres." And so, he lay awake most of the night thinking about it. And the next day before sunlight, he was up and he was banging on the wagons of the Turks and saying, "Come on, let's get going, And they come out, and so they start boiling tea and stuff, and they're drinking tea, and they offer Joseph some. "No, come on, I want to get going, And I said, "Well, you can't start till the sun, is rising." But he still didn't want to waste any time drinking tea. And so anyway, they headed off to a high hill, and the chief sat down there with the other men, and he laid his fur hat on the ground. And he said, okay, you need to put your 1,000 rubles there. And he said, this is basically the starting point. So at the end of the day, before the sun sets, you need to be back here at the camp. And Joseph said, okay, fine, I'm ready to get going. And took some deep breaths and got all ready. He was looking around, and all the land looked good. He decided, well, I'll start off going east towards the rising sun. So as soon as it started coming up over the horizon, he took off, and he marked the place where he started. They had given him a small spade, and he was able to dig a little hole to mark that's where he had been. And he started on. And at first, he had a lot of energy, and he was just springing along and thinking, wow, every step I take, I'm just getting more land and more land. I'll be richer and richer. And the land seemed to get better the further he went. The soil seemed to be blacker and richer. So anyway, he kept going. Finally thought, well, I should probably stop here. It was looked like noontime. And anyway, he dug a hole to mark where he had been. And then he turned to head the next direction. And he started walking that, but kind of like here, it's getting hot. And so, oh boy, he was getting tired. But he knew he had to just keep plodding on. He thought, okay, it's going to be a miserable day, but at the end of it, all this land I'm going to have, it'll be well worth it. And he kept going. Finally, he stopped and drank some water, ate some food. He was afraid to lay down because he hadn't slept all night. He was afraid to lay down to rest. I might fall asleep, and then how many acres will I lose? How many thousands of acres because I slept for a couple hours or something like that. So he just kept pushing on, and he finally thought, I should be turning the next corner here. But he noticed, oh wow, there's a watered area there. It'd be a shame to leave that out. So I'm just going to go on the other side of it. So he pushed himself on. And then he decided, okay, I better make my turn here, and started going. Well, now he noticed the sun was halfway down, and he realized, wow, I'm not going to be able to make a square like this. I'll never get done. So he went 2 miles. He thought, I better head back to the hill. I'm not going to get back if I don't do it now. My land's going to look kind of funny, but at least I'll still have quite a lot of it. So he started plodding towards the hill. His legs were giving out. He had blisters on his feet, breathing heavy. Heat was about to kill him. Thirst. But he thought, I've got to get back before the sun goes down. And the sun just kept getting closer and closer to the horizon. He was getting really worried. I may not make it back. I might lose everything. And he's pushing harder and harder. His heart is beginning to hurt. He's thinking, oh, what if I die? Maybe I should just stop now and just forget this. I might die out here. I thought, well, everyone will laugh at me then if that happens and I don't get any land, So he kept pushing on and pushing on. He saw the sun getting closer. He was just so worried, I'm not going to make it. He was pushing harder and harder towards the hill. And finally he reached the base of the hill, and the sun had gone down below the horizon, and he yelled, oh no, I've missed it all. I've got nothing, all of this for nothing. Then he heard all the Turks were cheering and motioning him on, and he realized, oh, on top of the hill, they can still see the sun, So he dashes up the hill, his heart's hurting, he's going, he sees the cap there, and he runs up and he dives and makes it to the cap before the sun goes down, and the Turks are all cheering him, and the chief says, boy, this is a shrewd man, he really got a lot of land. Well, Joseph was still laying there, so the chief told the servant, why don't you help your master up, and so the servant went over there and tried to get him up, and felt his pulse, and realized Joseph was dead. He had pushed himself so hard. So all the servant could do was to dig a grave. 6 feet long. That's all the land Joseph needed. 6 feet. And that was it. So what do you think the moral of that story is? I'll ask one of you young guys here. What do you think the lesson? What do you think he was trying to teach us in that story? Yes? Greed, okay. Yeah, to not when we're not content, you know, and it can go on and go on. You think, oh, just a little bit more, and I'll be happy. But, you know, the Bible says a lover of silver will never be satisfied, and that's so true. And you think, oh, if I just had this, I'd be happy. And if I just had this much more, I'd be happy. And if that's what you're basing happiness on, you're not going to ever be happy. All right, I'm going to tell you another story by Tolstoy. These all take place, like I say, in Russia. Brother, did you say you were from Hungary originally? Yes. Yes, you. Yes, you. Several of you. Many of you.
I'm from Ukraine.
Ukraine. What about you?
I'm from Hungary.
Yes, that's what I thought. Okay, Ukraine, Hungary. Do you all read Tolstoy growing up?
It was our school program.
Yeah, I figured it probably was. Did you hear that story before?
Teacher, no.
Okay. Well, good. Okay. Well, maybe you won't have heard this one either. All right. I guess in communist Ukraine, they probably didn't want you to hear that one anyway. Okay, this one is entitled Where Love Is, God Is. And it takes place in a little village in Russia. And again, a very poor man named Martin. Yeah, I didn't make that up. That's his name. His first name. He was a cobbler. And honest, hardworking man, very poor. He lived in a little basement apartment, just a tiny little space in a basement. Below the street, he had a little window that he could look up and see people's feet was all he could see. But he had made so many of the shoes in town that he could look up and he could recognize who it was most of the time by their shoes. And he would say, oh, that's, you know, John so-and-so because, yeah, I remember making those shoes for him or so on. He was an older man now, and as he got older, he had spent more and more time focusing on God in his life, and he found that just made his whole life that much more happy and focused, and gave him a sense of purpose even with his job in making shoes. And he would work every day. He was a very good craftsman until it was dark, and then have a little bit of cabbage soup or bread or something for supper, and then he would pull out his Bible, sit at his table, and read. And this particular night, he was reading in the Gospels, and he was reading about the Pharisee who had invited Jesus to his house, but gave him no water to wash his feet, hadn't greeted him with a kiss, and then was feeling very self-righteous towards the woman who was a sinner who had washed his feet with her tears. You remember the event, I'm sure. And Joseph thought to himself, wow, how terrible that the Pharisee treating Jesus that way, to treat any guest. But here this was Jesus, and that he only thought of himself and didn't think of his guest. And he thought, would I be any different? If Jesus had come and dined with me, would I be just like that man? And he wondered on that. Anyway, he read a little bit more, and then he fell asleep there at the table as he was reading. And he suddenly heard a voice saying, Martin, Martin. And he looked up, and he couldn't tell where it was. And the voice said, look for me tomorrow. I'm going to come and visit you. And he heard it twice. And anyway, he finally woke up, and he wasn't sure if that had been a dream, a vision. Had he really heard that voice or not? Well, he went back to sleep, slept until morning, and then that morning he got up. He was pretty excited because he was pretty sure he had heard the voice. And so he made breakfast, put on some tea for later in the morning, and he sat by the window where he usually worked, where there was light. And but this particular day, he was looking out the window as much as he was working, because every time he'd hear footsteps, he'd look up and think, wow, maybe this is Jesus, you know, and he'd see if he recognized the shoes, whatnot. And this went on for some time. Well, later in the morning, he looked up and he recognized the worn boots of a man, older man, a really older man named Vlad, who was pretty well too old to work, but someone in the village had taken him in, had hired him to shovel snow off the sidewalk, to do what he could. It was more just an act of mercy. And he was out there trying to shovel snow, but he was just so old and weak, and it was so cold. He didn't get very far before he put down his spade and was just resting against the wall. And Martin saw him and thought, okay, I bet he's really cold. And so he went out to the door and said, hey, Vlad, why don't you come in and get a cup of tea? So he came in, and Martin took the tea off the stove where he was keeping it warm and gave him a cup of tea, and they chatted a little bit. And Vlad finished his cup of tea and turned it over, the cup, and Martin kind of guessed, I bet he'd like a second cup. So he said, would you like another cup of tea? And Vlad said, oh, that would be wonderful. So he poured him another cup, and he kept looking out the window, and Vlad said, are you expecting somebody? And Martin said, well, you know, I'm a little embarrassed to tell you this, but since you asked, this is the situation. He told him about dream or vision. He wasn't sure which it was, you know. He said, I might have imagined this. I don't really know, but I guess I believe it, and so I've been looking, you know, for Jesus to come. And Vlad said, well, yeah, I don't know about those things, but yeah, I hope it works out for you. And anyway, with his second cup, he thanked Martin, and he went back out on the sidewalk. And anyway, Martin kept working. He kept, you know, looking out the window. He saw a baker go by, and one of the richer men who lived in the building next door recognized his very fine boots. And then he saw this woman in very tattered clothing, and she was holding a baby in her arms. And she moved up against the building and turned her back so the wind, she could shield the baby from the wind somewhat. But she had nothing warm on. It looked like just a summer dress. And so Martin went out and invited her to come in and get warm. And she told him that the baby was crying. She said, the baby's hungry. I'm not able to produce any milk. And so Vlad immediately had her sit down at the table. And he brought her some soup and bread, said, eat, I'll take care of your baby while you're eating. He said, I've raised children. I know how to, you know, do this. So he took the baby and comforted it, and she was able to eat, and later she was able to nurse the baby. And he said, how come you're not dressed any warmer? She said, this is all I have. You know, I did have a shawl, but I had to end up pawning it for 6 pennies just to get some food yesterday, and so this is all I have left. And so he looked in his closet, and he found an old cloak. He said, you know, I don't have very much myself, but here, why don't you take this? And then he went under his bed, and he had a little box there of money, and he opened it up and pulled out 6 pennies. He said, here, take this and get your shawl out of the pawn shop. Anyway, she thanked him and blessed him for it, and she went on, and he kept working, kept you know, looking out to see, okay, when is Jesus going to get here, you know, and or did I imagine this whole thing, you know, and the afternoon was passing, and then he saw this older woman who sold apples on the corner. She came by. She had a big sack of wood chips on her back that she found at a construction site that she would use, you know, to have a fire. And it was apparently uncomfortable, so she had stopped there by his window and was trying to get the chips sorted where they wouldn't be poking into her, and she'd put her apple basket on a post there while she was doing that. And this small boy in a tattered cap, he runs up and grabs an apple. Well, she sees him out of the corner of her eyes, and she turns and grabs his arm before he can run away. and says, I'm going to take you to the police. And he's screaming, I haven't done anything. What are you, and they're going back and forth. And Martin, runs out and tries to break them apart. And she's saying, this little rascal, he needs to go to the police, and that'll teach him never to steal again. And the boy's saying, I didn't take anything. And they're back and forth. And Martin is now holding on to the boy. He said, look, I saw you steal the apple. So I know you did it. But he said, if you'll ask this woman's forgiveness, I'm sure she'll forgive you. Well, the old lady said, what do you mean forgive him? He needs to get spanked or put in jail or something like that. Well, so Martin told her the parable of the unforgiving servant, the one who owed his master this huge amount of money. And when it was forgiven him, then he wouldn't forgive his fellow servant who owed him just a little bit. And he explained, that's all of us, what we owe God for our sins. And then if we won't forgive our fellow man, and what about this little boy here? If he can't be forgiven for stealing an apple, well, where do any of us stand? And so she said, well, okay, I guess he is. He's just young and doesn't know better. And she said, I've got grandchildren his age, and she started talking about her grandchildren and how much she loved them, and she got in a much better mood, and she said, well, I better be heading home. And Martin said, well, look, I'm going to pay for this apple for this boy. And then the boy said, look, grandmother, I'll carry your wood chips for you to your house. I'm headed that same direction you are. And so they went off together. And Martin went back in happy, and well, he worked some more, looking out, and no one special came, so it finally got dark, and he closed up shop and had a brief supper, and then he took out his Bible to read again, and suddenly he heard a voice in the back of his little apartment there, and it said, don't you know me, Martin? And he looked up and said, who is that? And suddenly the old man Vlad stepped out of the shadows, smiling at Martin, and then he disappeared like a wisp of smoke. And then another voice, don't you know me, Martin? And it was the poor peasant woman with the baby. And she stepped out smiling, and then she just disappeared in a puff of smoke. And then finally the apple woman and the young boy who had stolen the apple, and they stepped out. And Martin was just filled with joy, and he went down to finish reading, and he noticed the Bible pages had flipped, and the Bible had turned to Matthew 25. And he started reading that, where Jesus said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. And it concludes, to the extent you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And Martin realized Jesus really had come that day and visited him, and he had welcomed him and treated him like a fine guest. And that's the end of that story. So I'll turn to the sisters here. What did you learn from that story? What do you think the point of it is? Pardon?
It makes me wonder who's knocking at my door.
Who's knocking at your door? Yeah. Because every person we deal with, in a sense, is Jesus, how we treat them. If they're poor, if there's somebody who needs whatever, that to the extent we do it to somebody else, we're doing it to Jesus. They don't have to be a brother or sister in the church. Any person is our fellow brother or sister, and how we treat them is how we're treating Jesus Christ. And we can imagine that we really love Jesus and we would do this and that if Jesus were here, how I would treat him. But it's how we treat one another that really shows. And that's who we are treating. Okay, I will give one more story, and then we'll take maybe a little break before the next message. You all awake enough for another story? I know it's an unusually hot summer for you guys. This would be unusually cool for us, but I know it's unusually warm here. Well, and this one is about a spark and a fire, so it maybe fits this afternoon. Again, it takes place in a village in Russia. This time it's a peasant named Ivan Tarakin. Now, in English, we usually say Ivan, and so I'm going to call him Ivan. I think Ivan is maybe the... What's the correct way to pronounce it? Ivan, yeah. We're too dumb in America to say Ivan, so we say Ivan, so anyway. Anyway, Ivan Tarakin, he lived in a small village. He was a poor peasant like the other ones in these stories, and who would have comprised 95% of Russia, is why so many of the characters were poor peasants, because that's who most Russians were in Tolstoy's day. And you know, life was good. I mean, he was poor, he and his family, but he had work. They had a house over their head, enough money for clothes and food to eat, and that, and everyone got along good in the village. His neighbor was a man named Gabriel. Those are the only two names you're going to have to remember: Ivan and Gabriel. Okay. Ivan's the main character, Gabriel is his next door neighbor, okay? And anyway, like I say, everyone got along. If someone needed to borrow something, you just go next door to your neighbor. I'm out of flour, can I borrow some flour? I need some eggs, whatever. My wagon is broken, can I use your wagon today? In fact, a lot of the stuff in the village, this one was borrowed from that person, and all of that, and everything was really fine until one day when the feud started. And like so many quarrels, whether they're between nations, between people, whatever, often they're over fairly trivial things. And this was one of those. It all started one day. Ivan's chicken, the hen, got scared by the children. And it flew over the fence into Gabriel's yard and disappeared and laid an egg somewhere there. Well, Ivan's daughter-in-law didn't have time right then to chase after it to get the egg, so she sort of forgot about it for then, went on with her chores. And then later in the day, she was thinking, oh yeah, there was an egg. And was wondering where it was, and one of the relatives, his name was Boris, he said, oh, I saw it, the chicken flew over the fence over into Gabriel's yard. Did I say that backwards? Okay. And it laid an egg over there. She said, oh, okay. So she went over to Ivan's house, went over to Gabriel's house, and anyway, Gabriel's mother comes out, sees her out there in the yard looking around, said, oh, can I help you? And she said, yes, you know, our hen flew over here this morning and I think laid an egg, and I was just coming to get the egg. You probably have seen the egg. And Gabriel's mother said, what do you mean? We've got eggs enough of our own. We have our own hens, we've got our own eggs. We don't go taking other people's eggs. And it was kind of a sharp reply. And so the daughter-in-law didn't like the way this woman spoke to her, so she shot back her own retort to that. And pretty soon they start arguing because of that. And that's how a lot of things start. You know, just a kind word can turn so many things away. Well, this time it didn't just go away. The other ladies coming in from their chores, working out in the fields, they see these two women arguing, so they start jumping in. Each one takes the side of their family. And then one of them notices that the other is using their wooden yoke that they put pails of water on, and says, hey, that's our yoke, and grabs it and spills the water. And now they're all mad at each other. They're pulling their hair, ripping the other person's clothes, and now everyone in the neighborhood's hearing it. Well, then the men are coming in from the field, and they see what's happening, and they jump in. And Ivan and his neighbor Gabriel, finally, they're shouting at each other, and Ivan reaches out and grabs his beard, Gabriel's, and rips out a bunch of hair from his beard. Well, I don't have a beard. I'm always afraid someone will see that. Anyway, they all go home mad at each other. And Gabriel says, well, I'll teach Ivan a lesson. Pull out my beard. I need to grow this beard just so that idiot can come and pull out half of the beard. I'm going to go talk to the judge tomorrow, and he'll end up in jail. Maybe they'll ship him to Siberia. So anyway, he goes and lodges a complaint with the judge. Well, then Ivan goes lodges a complaint about something else, and they keep going back and forth to the judges. Well, Gabriel did this. No, Ivan did this, and the judges are all sick of them, and they keep getting each other fined or put in jail, and back and forth. It all started over this one little egg, and pretty soon they're accusing each other of stealing this or that. One day the pin in their wagon was missing, the linchpin, I guess you call it, and someone said, yeah, I think I saw one of Ivan's boys take it, and everyone's just accusing everybody else, and just getting more and more worked up. Pretty soon the two families aren't even talking to each other except when they're yelling at each other. The children all get involved. When they're at school, they're fighting it with each other, taking up their family sides. And, well, it just keeps going. Well, Ivan's father lived with him, and he was a very devout, solid Christian. All of them were professing Christians, but they obviously weren't living like it. But his dad said, Ivan, you need to put this fire out before it goes any further. It's gone too far. You should have forgiven from the very start. It's all over nothing. Who cares about the egg? Who cares about this or that? You need to forgive, say you're sorry, and bring this whole thing to an end. But his son Ivan wouldn't listen to him. And so it kept going. This went on for 6 years. These two families are just feuding at each other, taking things from each other, breaking things, refusing to help one another when they needed it. All for nothing. Well, the 7th year, there's a wedding. And at the wedding, as in Russia, Gabriel's drinking, and he's had too much vodka or whatever. And one of Ivan's daughter-in-laws, she's going around in the wedding reception telling people that Gabriel had been found out to be a horse thief. And that started spreading. Well, when Gabriel heard that, he was really upset. And he comes over and slaps her so hard it knocks her off the chair that she's on. And, well, she's laid up in bed for a week. It turns out that she was pregnant at the time, expecting a child. So Ivan is thinking, okay, now I've got Gabriel. They'll definitely send him to Siberia for this, and this will be an end to him. I won't have him as a neighbor anymore. So he goes and files a complaint in court. But before it goes very far, the daughter-in-law recovers, the baby's fine, nothing lasting comes of it, and the judge is inclined to dismiss it. So Ivan takes him out, he and the clerk out, for a nice big feast and wines and dines him and all that. And the next day he ends up finding Gabriel guilty, which he was guilty. And he sentences him to be flogged 20 lashes. Well, Ivan's all excited. Aha, I didn't get him sent to Siberia, but still 20 lashes. That's going to teach him a lesson. Well, he walks out in the hallway from the courtroom, and he hears Gabriel talking to himself. And Gabriel's saying something about, all right, if I'm flogged, my back will burn, but something's going to burn of Ivan's as well. He runs back in the court, and he says, Judge, this man is saying he's going to burn my house down. And so the judge calls Gabriel back in. The two men are there and says, okay, what's this about you going to burn down Ivan's house? And Gabriel said, I didn't say anything about that. And anyway, so he totally denies it. And the judge says, look, this whole thing has gone on and on with you two men and your families. Why don't you all just bring an end to this? Look, Gabriel, I'm sure if you go to Ivan and tell him you're sorry for what you did to his daughter-in-law, that he'll forgive you. And if you'll do that and he forgives you, then I'll throw the sentence out. Well, you think Gabriel would do it, but he was so ticked off. He says, you mean this idiot Ivan, ask him for forgiveness? I'm 50 years old. I've never been flogged in my life. And now because of him, I've been sentenced to be flogged. Ask him for forgiveness? No way. And so, all right, the judge leaves the sentence. Well, they drive back home to the village. He doesn't get flogged that night because it's a sentence to be executed later. But Ivan gets home and his dad says, so what happened at court? And Ivan tells him that Gabriel is sentenced to be flogged with 20 lashes. His father said, that's a terrible thing, Ivan. Look at what you've done. This thing just keeps escalating. You need to go over right now, apologize to Gabriel, ask his forgiveness, and bring this whole thing to an end. If you don't, it's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. And Ivan, no, he defends himself and all that. He goes back and forth, and finally, he sees that his father's right. Yes, I need to do that. I'll go over there now, and then I'll go to the judge tomorrow, and we'll get the whole thing solved. He's about to do that. Just then, his wife and his daughter-in-law, they come in from the fields, and they say, you're not going to believe what we heard, but Gabriel's wife said that they now have gotten another judge on their side, and that he's going to reverse the whole thing, and it's going to all now come back on you. And the teacher in the village, the school teacher, well, he's written out a petition to the Tsar, and they're going to get you sent to Siberia. Well, now Ivan's all worked up again, and he thinks, forgive that idiot Gabriel. No way am I going to do that. He deserves the 20 lashes. That man deserves all he can get. He starts thinking, boy, I wonder if he is going to set fire to my house or something. He was talking about it. So he thinks, wow, before I go to bed, I'm going to walk around the house and the sheds and just make sure everything's okay. So he starts walking around in the dark and goes around one corner, nothing, and then another corner, and then off in the distance, dark. He can't see very good, but it looks like a man crouching down there, and he's trying, is that really a man? And then the man stands up, and he realizes now it definitely is a man, and he's got some kind of fire in his hand, and next thing he knows, the thatch of one of the sheds, they're all thatched roofs, is on fire. And so and now with the fire, he can see it's definitely Gabriel. So he starts running after him. Gabriel, I'll get you, you scoundrel, and is running after him. Well, he stops where the fire's going and is thinking, oh, I can just snatch that burning straw and that'd be the end of it. But then Gabriel will get away, and if I don't catch him in the act, they won't punish him. So he keeps running after Gabriel and gets all the way to Gabriel's fence, and then Gabriel picks up a stick there, turns around and hits him over the head, knocks him out. Well, when he comes to, even though it's the middle of the night, he sees all this light, and he gets up kind of groggy, and he realizes the roof of his shed is on fire. He says, oh no, all I had to do was just snatch the burning straw and stamp it out, and that would have been it, you know. He runs over there, tries to get some water to put it out, but it's too late. Then the wind picks up, and the fire goes from the shed to his house, and now Ivan's house is on fire. And pretty soon they have to evacuate everyone out of the house because the house is burning down. But it doesn't stop there. Everything is dry, the wind is blowing, blows over to Gabriel's house. His house catches on fire. Before it's over, half of the village is on fire and burns down before they're finally able to put it out. Well, the next morning, Ivan is just sitting there muttering, all I had to do was just snatch the straw and stamp it out, you know, and that's all he can say. He just keeps repeating that over and over. His house is all burned up. They saved a few things, but not very much. The sheds are burned up, everything, you know. And well, then a man comes running up and says, Ivan, your father is dying. They got him out of the fire, but some of the burning thatch had fallen on him, and he was burned pretty badly. And he said, he's dying, but he's called for you. And he's over at the mayor's house that was at the other end of town and had not burned. So Ivan goes over there, and his dad is laying there near death, and he says, Ivan, what did I tell you? that if he didn't stop this, that it was going to just keep growing and growing and growing. And he said, Ivan, who burned the village down? And Ivan said, well, Gabriel, that idiot Gabriel, he did it. I saw him, start the fire. His dad said, yeah, but who really burnt the village down? Whose unforgiveness was it that caused all of this to happen? Finally, Ivan realized it was him. He said, it's me. I'm the one who burned down the village. It's my fault. If I had forgiven, none of this would have happened. His father said, praise God. That's what I've been waiting to hear for 7 years now. And now I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to live. I mean, everything is burned up. His father said, you just obey God and trust in Him. You'll make out. Things will work out. It'll be hard for a while, but things will work out. And he prayed, and then he died. Well, Gabriel went over and Ivan went over and apologized to Gabriel. Told him he was sorry what had happened, which Gabriel was really surprised, and then he apologized back. And Ivan never told anyone how the fire started. No one else had seen it, and no one knew exactly what had happened that had caused it. And Ivan decided never to tell anyone, never did. Well, the two families, in getting going again, when they got a house finally built, they moved in together. They lived together in that house for a year or so until they were able to afford to get a second house built, and then they decided they wanted to be neighbors again. And they're neighbors to this day. And God did take care of Ivan. His needs were met, and his life turned out better than it had even been before. Okay, so either young lady or young guy, what was the moral of that story?
Stop the fight before it starts.
Right. Yeah.
Two.
It does take two. It's pretty rare when it's just one person who's at fault, and if you let things go, it just usually gets worse and worse. It builds up. And even if the other person is the one mainly at fault, it's still right, as you as a Christian, to ask forgiveness of them and to forgive them for what they did. And you will be happier and much better off in the end. You look at the misery these people had just because they wouldn't forgive. And that happens today. That tale is a made-up story, but I can guarantee you that sort of thing has happened over and over again. All right, I think we're ready for a break. Is there going to be a dismissal of the young people, or what's the plan here, right at this point?
There'll be a But this is the time that someone needs to take a little break. You